Welcome to the very first episode of Honors Spotlight, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories, passions, and projects of the remarkable individuals from the Honors College at MTSU. I'm your host, Robin Lee, and I couldn't be more excited to launch our series with a guest whose work blends tradition, technology, and personal heritage in a truly groundbreaking way. Today, we are joined by Colman Connolly, an honors student, award-winning pianist, and lifelong devotee of traditional Irish music. Colman's thesis project is more than an academic pursuit. It's a deeply personal mission to preserve and revitalize the legacy of Michael Coleman, the renowned Irish fiddler whose early 20th century recordings defined a genre but were limited by the technology of the time. Through advanced AI audio techniques and his own artistic vision, Colman Connolly has reimagined Michael Coleman's iconic tracks, bringing new clarity and cultural depth to modern listeners. So grab your headphones and maybe a cup of tea and join us for a conversation that spans continents, centuries, and the timeless power of music. So let's start at the beginning. How did your upbringing in an Irish-American musical family shape your relationship with traditional Irish music?
Well, it was basically everything. I don't even think I would have been exposed to Irish music if not for my family. There was always Irish music playing around the house. My dad had a big collection, and my mom, of vinyls and CDs and cassettes. That was always playing, whether it be on our stereo in the living room or in the car. Always, whenever we had a road trip, my dad was playing Irish music. My dad also was a recording artist, and he would be recording an album or mixing an album and be always listening to the new mix of the album. So constantly I was inundated with that music. For better or for worse, I always joke. But some of the most common artists would be, the Bothy Band. The Dannon is a big one, which was an Irish group that were very popular in the 70s. Frankie Gavin is the fiddler for the Dannon and is my dad's basically favorite fiddle player. So I was very familiar with that. And playing gigs with my family, which a lot of, people don't get the opportunity to do. I would be playing piano accompaniment. My mom would be on flute. My dad would be on either accordion or fiddle, and we would play around local Irish spots, whether it be pubs or there was a Gaelic American club close to where I grew up. And we had some regular gigs there on Sundays, and sometimes they would have ceilidh dances, traditional Irish ceilidh dances, which is a lot like line dancing. It would have influenced American country line dancing. And I don't know, I was always surrounded by the culture.
So was there a special resonance with your name, Colman? And how did that early association with Michael Coleman affect your musical identity growing up?
Well, I think so. I joked about it in the introductory paragraph of my thesis a little, but I don't think my dad, even though he was a fiddle player, I don't think he named me after Michael Coleman. My dad was a religion teacher, and he named me after some, Irish Saint Colman something. But whenever I introduced my name as Colman, it was always assumed that I was named after Michael Coleman. And, when I was very little, I didn't even know who that was. I was almost offended a little. I'm not Michael Coleman, But, I think my father was kind of obsessed with Michael Coleman when he was growing up. He told me stories of, before we have the technology today where we can isolate the fiddle, he would slow down the cassettes so that it sounded like a funeral dirge pretty much. And he was trying to discern whether he was playing with an up bow or a down bow at any given time. And based on, how it sounded when it was slow, you could kind of discern that. I don't know, maybe subconsciously it affected a desire for musical greatness or something, but I don't know if that sounds... I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds fancy.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment or track of Michael Coleman's that first made you realize this is someone you want to study and honor with your thesis?
I don't think, not necessarily a particular moment. I think it was just the totality of, his body of work. Because, for anyone who's interested in Irish music, it's an oral tradition, and things are passed down through just hearing it in local pubs or whatnot, and a lot like pop music on the radio, a lot of times you don't know what the name of the song is or what the artist is, especially in traditional Irish tunes. They're kind of passed down a lot, like nursery rhymes would be here. So a lot of the times I didn't even know the names of the tunes. These things would just kind of seep into me subconsciously. I would go to a pub to accompany some music, and then all of a sudden I notice, oh, I've actually heard this thing before. So I think, I wasn't an active fan when I was younger. I just kind of heard it in the background, but it definitely influenced me. And I don't know, I think a big reason why I wanted to do this is actually for my dad, who was, a big fan of Michael Coleman, is kind of a gift to him. Because, he was amongst the people who joked, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could remove this terrible piano accompaniment? And I feel in doing so, it's a little gift for him. And he's been very excited whenever I played it. He's like, oh my gosh,
Bet.
Yeah.
So for those who are less familiar, how would you describe Michael Coleman's impact on traditional Irish music and what made his sound so revolutionary at the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Michael Coleman was originally from Sligo, from County Sligo in Ireland, but he emigrated to the Americas, I think, was it the late 1910s or something? I forget, but my thesis will, if you want to read my thesis, you can find out there. But he ended up, to get work, he had to play on the vaudeville circuit, and that's very show-tuney, it would be characterized by basically what the Irish would consider being a show-off player, playing a lot of ornamentation, sliding up and down the fiddle. And another characteristic of his playing was from County Sligo, this Sligo style of fiddling, which was very influenced by the pipers of the day, which is characterized by, it's very upbeat. They call it a lilting or a lift in the playing. And it's something that, you can't really describe unless you listen to it. And when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I understand why that might be called a lift. But anyway, when these first recordings came out, they were shipped back to Ireland. And it had two effects. One, people had different reactions. One was like, what is this Colman guy playing? All these vaudevillian, crazy ornament stuff. Like, this isn't real Irish music. But it ended up influencing a lot of the style and techniques of the fiddlers. The other effect it had is it kind of homogenized the sound of fiddle music, because fiddle music was very regional back then. As you can imagine from any oral tradition, in different areas of Ireland, the fiddling style developed differently. But now you have one reference recording that all these younger fiddle players are listening to, and in effect, it standardized some fiddle styles. But, sadly, it also kind of led to the demise of some regional styles. So pros and cons there.
Almost kind of sounds like an Irish fiddle version of Elvis.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it, I think.
So he recorded in an era of limited technology. In your view, what are some of the most misunderstood or overlooked aspects of his recordings?
That's a great question. Well, something I think that struck me when I first started this project and listened to all these recordings for the first time in a while again, is that some of the tunes end very abruptly. Like, it'll be very weird. Because normally you would imagine, let's say you have 4 minutes allotted for 2 tunes to play. One would imagine that you would play each tune for around the same amount of time. So if you have 4 minutes, you might play the first tune for 2 minutes, transition to the other one, play that for another 2 minutes, and then be over. But what would happen with Coleman's recordings is, let's say you had 3 minutes, he would play the first tune for like 2 minutes, 15 seconds, or 2 minutes, 30 seconds, then transition to the next tune, play that for only 30 seconds, and the recording would be over. Now, the reason for that is because, unlike, digital technology, or even more advanced analog recording technology, he was recording onto 78 RPM discs, and that had a finite time within which, you can record. So, I don't know for sure, but I'd like to imagine that he would be playing, and then there's someone in the studio, with a big X, like, you better stop, or, this needle's going to run out, or whatnot. So I think that would be something that's maybe misunderstood, or if not misunderstood, people don't know about it at least. But it's kind of funny hearing some of the improvised endings to these recordings. They're a little ridiculous. It's like, oh, where the heck did that come out of? That doesn't even sound like the tune. But, necessity is the mother of invention, I suppose.
Yeah. Do you think he was aware at the time of the legacy that he was creating?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, there's no way of knowing. But I would almost certainly surmise no being the answer. If I had to guess, it was just his way to make a living. Just like, any number of the immigrants over, they probably, didn't have much money. He knew he was talented as a musician. This is a great way to make money. And that was probably all he thought about it at the time. Obviously putting words in his mouth. Maybe he thought completely differently, but I don't think, like any artist, he could have possibly imagined like how widespread the technology and how available it is. Because even then, you had to buy the records for what would have been maybe $10 to $15 in today's US dollars. But now you can listen to any of these things like for free on YouTube or Spotify, streaming them at any time on a whim. So they're very accessible. They've been very influential to generations. I mean, it's been 100 years since, and he's influenced people who've influenced people who've influenced people who've influenced people. So, in the genealogy of Irish folk instrumentation, he's pretty important. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, to give you a sense of just how powerful Colman's work is, we're going to listen to one of his remastered recordings. This is Trip to Sligo, a piece originally performed by Michael Coleman, now brought to life with renewed clarity and spirit through Colman's innovative process. really stunning, Coleman. Let's talk about how you made it happen. Can you walk us through the process of using AI stem separation and how you approached reimagining the accompaniment while staying true to the spirit of the original?
Sure. That's a great question. So there was this company, Audio Shake, that my thesis advisor, Daniel Rowland, introduced me to. And he was able to make a deal with their CEO to give me about, I think, $200 of free stem separation. So how it works is it's an artificial intelligence model. For those who don't know what that means, a model is basically an algorithm that's designed to detect certain patterns and glean certain results. So for example, to detect the piano sound within this archaic recording and isolate it. Basically, I mean, it was pretty simple. I had to upload just all of the recordings I could get, who I sourced from some guy that ironically I found on YouTube, who's a master's a student at Michigan State University. I sourced the audio from him, uploaded it through this program, Audio Shake, and then had to comb through one by one, figure out which ones were sufficient, which ones weren't, because sometimes you'd have some problems, like the piano would bleed through, which means that basically if you're listening to the isolated fiddle track, for example, you might have the piano come up when it's not supposed to be. So that was a challenge that we encountered. But Audio Shake wasn't the only one that we tried. We tried, several different ones. There was this one called Moises, and there was this one called lalal.ai, and all these things have ridiculous names. That's me and my thesis advisor were joking about how ridiculous all the names were. But I would just, upload the audio into a bunch of different ones, test out the different algorithms. They had algorithms to isolate the strings, for example, or isolate the piano, or isolate guitar, or isolate other, whatever that means, depending on the context. And you just have to listen through and see which came out with the best result.
Okay. You said that was simple, but I appreciate you breaking that down in layman's terms for us. So you didn't stop at separation. You kind of overlaid historically informed piano accompaniments of your own. So how did you approach balancing authenticity with creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I just used the same approach I would at any Irish session or whenever I record with anyone else, just approaching it from the ground up. You start listening through, and you start from the technical aspect, and that is making sure you got the rhythm right and the structure of the tune right, and most importantly, the chords right, because as an accompanist, you're creating the harmonic layout of the tune. So I listen through and notate the chords by ear. And then, as an accompanist, you gotta realize that, or remember that you're not the solo instrument, right? The focus shouldn't be on you. And if you're listening to these recordings and you're primarily hearing the piano or listening to the piano, that means I'm not doing my job correctly, because the focus should be on the fiddle playing. I'm just literally accompanying it. I want to make sure it's not too conspicuous. So I think partly stylistically, I was kind of informed by some of the original piano recordings, because I didn't want to go too far off from the vaudevillian style. So that would be characterized by using some chromaticism for people who are into music theory. Like for example, Irish music is very modal, and it would be all diatonic, but for people who are interested, like if you're in the key of E minor, it would be using a B major or B7 instead of a B minor, something like that, or using augmented chords and using some syncopation. So those are some characteristics of the vaudevillian style. But other than that, I'm influenced by piano players, especially like Charlie Lennon, who came later. A lot of his recordings are from the 70s and 80s. He's a big influence on mine. So I think it's the culmination of all that.
It's fascinating to hear how much thought and care went into every detail of the restoration process. To really appreciate the transformation, we want to play a short comparison for our listeners. First, here's a clip from the original 1920s recording of Paddy Ryan's Dream, complete with all the crackle and quirks of early recording technology. And now, Coleman's remastered version of the same tune, highlighting Michael Coleman's brilliance with new clarity and carefully reimagined accompaniment. Coleman, beyond the sound itself, this work carries deep cultural meaning. So let's talk about the impact of these recordings, not just for musicians, but for Irish heritage and identity. In your thesis, you talk about rekindling Michael Coleman's legacy for today's listeners. How do you think this project changes how people, especially younger musicians, engage with traditional Irish music?
That's a great question. Well, I think our generation is really used to music that sounds pristine, sonically pleasing across the stereo spectrum. And I like to use the example of the fact that, unrelated to Irish music, I'm a big Beatles fan. But whenever I listen to their music on Spotify with, other songs in a playlist, it sounds very off because of how badly the originals were mixed. The panning of it, there might be a bass guitar in one headphone and a vocal in another, and it sounds weird. Whereas in most pop tunes now, things are panned mostly all down the center, where it's very grounded. And I think in the same way, hearing the tinny Michael Coleman original recordings can be jarring for many modern listeners, especially young listeners. The piano accompaniment is very discordant, and my worries is that the younger generation, instead of taking the chance and listening to it, will just be more inclined to turn it off. So my goal is remixing the tracks so that they're more appropriate for modern listeners. And this reminds me, I was just at a dinner with my friend Dylan Foley yesterday, and he's an All-Ireland world champion fiddle player, and I played him some of these recordings, and he remarked that, oh man, the originals are just so lousy, and they're, the sound quality is terrible that I just don't even want to listen to them. But listening to these new ones, he said, oh, you just really breathed new life into this. I would actually want to put this on in the background and listen to it. And I think that's the real goal of what I'm trying to do, just making these more accessible for the new generation.
Okay. So Irish music has deep ties to identity and resilience. What does this project mean to you personally in terms of cultural preservation?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a deep question, and I don't think I want to get too pretentious with this answer or feel like I have some self-importance in this project because, at the end of the day, this is really just a passion project for something I love. But, about resilience, I think Ireland has always been resilient because, its culture really survived through centuries of British suppression. And when Coleman was making his recordings, albeit in America, Ireland was still going through independence from the British. There was the transition from the Irish Republic to the Irish Free State, and now we're at the current Republic of Ireland. But he was offshore while a lot of this stuff was happening, and I would imagine maybe some of the social unrest is why he left for America in the first place. Though, if you're a Colman expert, you can be free to correct me if you're listening. But for a period, Irish language and culture and music was really dying because the British had outlawed Irish dance and Irish language and Irish religion, all these things. And I think the Colman recordings, along with the Flakiel Music Festival, which came a few years later, had a big part in revitalizing national interest in Irish music and in the national identity. And again, I don't think, obviously this is not going to have near an impact as him, but I hope in a small way these recordings can help further his legacy.
Yeah. Do you think that AI could be used similarly to restore other cultural audio artifacts? And are there any ethical or artistic lines to consider in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this project really proves that fact because a lot of people, especially in the creative realms, look at AI with this sort of a doomsday mentality. It's coming for our jobs. It's going to be the end of everything. But I think this project proves that it can be a constructive tool. And as a matter of fact, pertaining to old recordings, the company I mentioned earlier, AudioShake, is training the algorithm to accurately separate out stems from very old Disney recordings, like, Snow White, for example. So Disney might, ask AudioShake, oh, hey, we want to remix this old recording from the original Snow White, but in order to do that, we need to separate the stems. So they trained their algorithm on this. And I think maybe that was a part of why this worked so well, is because it had already been trained on old recordings. And as far as ethical lines, I think primarily there's the legality of things, whether or not the recordings are in the public domain. And, I'm sure there are other ethical considerations. Just asking the estate, the people who own the rights to the music, what they think is appropriate would be nice. I'm reminded of a Freddie Mercury quote. It's "Do whatever you want with my music, dear. Just don't make it boring." And I hopefully that's what I did in effect here.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, because they're not familiar with all of this, what exactly is a stem?
Sure. So a stem is just one constituent part of a recording in multi-track recording. So for example, let's say I'm recording a band. And for clarity, instead of just having one microphone in a room and recording the whole thing at one time, that's not going to be very clear, right? Some instruments might be louder than another. Like if you're in one room, the drums are going to be really loud. So what we do to fix this problem is we put at least one microphone on each of the sound sources. So you have, let's say, just in a very simple setup, one microphone on the drums, one microphone on a guitar amplifier, one microphone on the singer. And in doing it this way, now you can control the volumes of the individual elements. You can turn up the singer or turn down the drums. So stems is the same sort of idea, the constituent elements. So in these recordings, where it was piano and either guitar or piano accompaniment, the stems would just be the isolated piano and the isolated fiddle.
Okay. So what's next for you? Are there more recordings that you'd like to rework, or perhaps new ways to bring traditional Irish music to modern platforms?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Michael Coleman himself has around 60 more recordings that I haven't touched. I mean, I did the minority of, or not minority, but a small part of his work. That could be a direction I could go in. Another thing, I thought about, I could work with the Colman estate, see if I could issue some remixes in some way that they would agree to. And then there are a lot of other traditional Irish artists from back in the day. James Morrison, Paddy Cloran, other fiddle players, pipers from the early 1900s. So there are definitely a lot of different paths I could take.
Have you reached out to the Colman estate at all while you were working on your thesis?
I haven't, but I'm going to soon because I really would like to put this out there in some capacity. And at least from my conversation with Dylan yesterday, my friend Dylan Foley, the Irish fiddle player, he said, they would be very interested in this. So, yeah, hopefully soon.
Okay. So, lastly, if Michael Coleman could somehow hear these reimagined versions of his work, what do you hope he'd say?
I don't know. Well, I hope he'd like it. I hope he'd be impressed. I would imagine back in the day, they would just be happy with whatever audio quality. Recording still seems like magic now. Like no one of us here can actually explain how it works. So back 100 years ago would basically be magic. So, oh wow, I can hear myself at all. I mean, he would probably be happy, but to hear it in this renewed clarity, I think he hopefully would be impressed, but maybe he'd hate it. I'd have no way of knowing, but hopefully he'd say sláinte, which is Irish for cheers. So there you go.
Well, thank you very much.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Honors Spotlight. We hope you enjoyed getting to know the people, passions, and stories that make the MTSU Honors College so unique. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the podcast with others. You can also follow the Honors College on social media to stay up to date on future episodes and events. To learn more about honors at MTSU, visit honors.mtsu.edu. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep being extraordinary.